From the time we're children, we're taught that being friendly is one of the greatest qualities a person can have. Smile often. Be polite. Make everyone comfortable. Avoid conflict. Say yes whenever possible. On the surface, these lessons seem harmless because kindness is valuable. But there is a hidden line that very few people are taught to recognize. The moment friendliness becomes your default strategy for gaining acceptance, it stops being kindness and starts becoming a signal. And people are remarkably good at reading that signal, even if they can't explain why. Every interaction is an exchange of information. Long before anyone consciously judges your words, their brain is making rapid assessments about your confidence, your emotional state, and your social value. When you are excessively friendly from the very first moment, constantly agreeing, laughing too hard, offering favors that nobody requested, or trying to make everyone like you, you unintentionally reveal something important. You communicate that their approval matters more to you than your own standards. The more obvious that becomes, the less valuable you appear. Think about the people you naturally respect. They are usually polite, but they don't chase attention. They don't over-explain themselves. They don't rush to prove they're nice. Their friendliness is controlled rather than automatic. They smile when it feels genuine. They help when it makes sense. They aren't performing kindness to secure acceptance. That difference completely changes how they're perceived. Human beings are constantly measuring scarcity without realizing it. We assign greater value to things that seem selective rather than universally available. The same principle applies to attention and affection. If you give everyone unlimited warmth regardless of how they treat you, your friendliness loses meaning. It becomes expected instead of appreciated. People stop seeing it as a gift and begin treating it as the minimum they'll always receive. This is why some individuals discover that the more they try to be liked, the less respected they become. They answer every message immediately. They never disagree. They volunteer for every task. They apologize for things that aren't their fault. They forgive repeated disrespect because they don't want to appear rude. Ironically, all of these behaviors are intended to create stronger relationships, yet they often produce the opposite effect. Others slowly learn that there is no cost to taking advantage of them. The brain naturally looks for consistency between behavior and identity. When someone constantly seeks to please everyone around them, observers begin asking silent questions. Why are they trying so hard? What are they hoping to gain? Why do they seem uncomfortable disappointing anyone? Those questions rarely produce flattering conclusions. Instead of interpreting endless friendliness as confidence, people often interpret it as insecurity wrapped in politeness. This doesn't mean becoming cold, arrogant, or hostile. It means understanding that genuine confidence doesn't require constant reassurance from other people. Confident individuals don't feel pressure to fill every silence with conversation. They don't laugh at every joke simply to fit in. They don't agree with opinions they secretly reject just to avoid discomfort. Their behavior stays consistent because it comes from internal standards rather than external validation. Notice how social dynamics change around someone who is selective with their attention. Their compliments carry more weight because they aren't handed out to everyone. Their help feels meaningful because it isn't automatic. Their time seems valuable because it isn't endlessly available. Even simple conversations become different because people sense that this person's approval cannot be assumed. Excessive friendliness also removes healthy uncertainty from relationships. When people already know you'll forgive every mistake, accept every excuse, and remain available regardless of how you're treated. They have little incentive to invest in earning your trust or maintaining your respect. Predictability can create comfort, but too much predictability eliminates appreciation. The absence of boundaries teaches others exactly how little effort is required to keep you around. The strongest social presence often belongs to the person who doesn't need every interaction to end with approval. They remain respectful without becoming submissive. They remain approachable without becoming available to everyone. They understand that kindness has the greatest impact when it is intentional rather than automatic, and that being respected often begins the moment you stop trying to convince everyone that you're worth liking. Before you can change the way other people respond to you, you have to understand one of the most misunderstood ideas in human behavior. Kindness and neediness often look almost identical on the surface, but they come from completely different places. One is driven by strength, the other is driven by fear. The actions may appear similar, yet the intentions behind them create entirely different results. A kind person helps because they choose to. A needy person helps because they feel they have to. One gives freely without expecting anything in return. The other secretly hopes their generosity will buy acceptance, loyalty, or affection. The difference isn't visible in the behavior itself. It's visible in the emotional pressure behind it. People may not consciously recognize that pressure, but they almost always sense it. Imagine two people offering the exact same favor. The first says yes because they genuinely have the time and enjoy helping. If they can't help, they'll politely decline without guilt. The second immediately agrees, even though they're exhausted, busy, or uncomfortable. They're afraid that saying no will disappoint someone or damage the relationship. From the outside, both people appear generous, but internally, one is acting from confidence while the other is acting from anxiety. Human beings are remarkably sensitive to emotional motivation. We constantly pick up subtle signals through tone of voice, body language, facial expressions, timing, and hesitation. When someone is trying too hard to be liked, they often leak these signals without realizing it. They smile a little too much. They apologize too often. They laugh before anyone else does. They rush to solve problems that nobody asked them to solve. They constantly check whether everyone is happy with them. These behaviors aren't signs of kindness. They're signs of uncertainty. Neediness has an interesting effect on social relationships because it shifts the balance of emotional responsibility. Instead of interacting as equals, the needy person quietly places the burden of their emotional security onto everyone else. Their confidence rises or falls depending on how they're treated. If someone ignores their message, they become anxious. If someone seems distant, they immediately wonder what they did wrong. If someone criticizes them, they replay the conversation over and over in their mind. Kind people don't operate this way. They understand that not every reaction from another person is a reflection of their worth. Someone having a bad day doesn't automatically become their problem. Someone disagreeing with them doesn't threaten their identity. They remain respectful without becoming emotionally dependent on everyone's approval. This difference becomes especially obvious during conflict. A kind person can disagree while remaining calm because their goal is honesty, not popularity. A needy person often avoids disagreement altogether. They'll hide their true opinion, suppress frustration, and pretend everything is fine simply to preserve harmony. Unfortunately, that harmony is usually temporary. Resentment quietly builds beneath the surface until it eventually appears in unexpected ways. Another clue lies in how each person receives appreciation. A kind individual feels good when someone is grateful, but they don't require gratitude to feel satisfied. They would likely make the same decision even if nobody noticed. A needy person, however, often feels disappointed when their efforts go unrecognized. Deep down, they weren't just giving, they were making an emotional investment and expecting validation as the return. Over time, this creates a dangerous cycle. The more approval they receive, the more they crave it. The more they crave it, the harder they work to earn it. Eventually, they become trapped in a pattern where nearly every decision is influenced by how others might react. Ironically, this constant pursuit of approval often pushes people away instead of drawing them closer. Relationships become exhausting when one person constantly seeks reassurance. Friends, coworkers, and even family members begin to feel responsible for maintaining someone else's emotional stability. Instead of feeling free around them, they feel pressure. Confidence breaks this cycle because confidence isn't concerned with controlling how everyone feels. It focuses on controlling your own behavior. You can be generous without being available all the time. You can be compassionate without sacrificing your boundaries. You can care deeply about people without making their opinions the foundation of your self-worth. When kindness comes from strength, it feels effortless. There's no hidden transaction, no silent expectation, no fear attached to saying no. Your generosity becomes a choice instead of an obligation. And people begin to recognize that your respect, your attention, and your time are valuable because they are given intentionally rather than automatically. One of the fastest ways to lose respect is believing that boundaries push people away. Many people avoid setting limits because they fear being seen as selfish, difficult, or unfriendly. They tolerate interruptions, accept unreasonable requests, ignore disrespect, and constantly rearrange their lives to accommodate everyone else. They convince themselves this is what good people do. But in reality, the absence of boundaries rarely creates stronger relationships. It creates relationships built on imbalance. Every relationship teaches people how to treat you. It doesn't happen through speeches or demands. It happens through repetition. If someone cancels plans with you repeatedly and you always accept it without question, you've taught them your time is flexible. If someone speaks to you disrespectfully and you laugh it off every time, you've taught them disrespect has no consequences. If someone constantly asks for favors and you never decline, you've taught them your energy is always available. Human behavior adapts to patterns far more than words. Boundaries interrupt those patterns. They communicate something powerful without requiring aggression. They say, this is what I allow, and this is what I don't. That message doesn't require anger. In fact, the strongest boundaries are usually delivered with complete emotional control. People who respect themselves don't need dramatic confrontations because consistency does the work for them. There's an interesting psychological effect that happens whenever someone has clear standards. Others begin paying closer attention to their behavior. Why? Because predictable consequences create awareness. When people know certain actions won't be tolerated, they naturally become more careful. Not because they're afraid, but because they understand the relationship has structure. Structure creates stability, and stability often produces respect. Think about the people whose opinions carry weight. They don't constantly remind everyone to respect them. They simply behave in ways that make their expectations obvious. They don't answer every message immediately if they're busy. They don't abandon their priorities because someone else creates urgency. They don't reward rude behavior with extra attention. They remain calm, but they remain firm. That combination is surprisingly rare. Many individuals confuse boundaries with emotional walls. They're completely different. Walls are built out of fear. They keep everyone out. Boundaries are built out of self-respect. They allow healthy people in while preventing unhealthy behavior from becoming normal. One isolates you. The other protects you. The fear of disappointing people often keeps boundaries from ever being established. Someone asks for another favor, and you already know you're overwhelmed. Instead of saying no, you agree anyway because you don't want them to think less of you. For a moment, you feel relief because you've avoided an uncomfortable conversation. But that relief doesn't last. Soon frustration replaces it because you've sacrificed your own needs once again. Over time, these small compromises accumulate until resentment becomes stronger than the relationship itself. Ironically, the people who genuinely value you are usually the ones who respect your boundaries the most. Healthy individuals understand that everyone has limits. They don't interpret every no as rejection. They recognize that someone protecting their time, energy, and peace is acting responsibly rather than selfishly. Those who become angry whenever you establish a boundary often benefited from you having none. Another important reality is that boundaries reveal character. The moment you begin saying no occasionally, some relationships become stronger while others begin to weaken. That isn't because you've changed into a worse person. It's because the relationship was never based on mutual respect in the first place. It was based on unlimited access to your attention, your availability, or your willingness to sacrifice yourself for someone else's convenience. People often assume respect comes from being agreeable. In reality, agreement without standards creates predictability, and predictability without value creates complacency. When others know you'll always give in, they'll stop appreciating your flexibility because it no longer feels like generosity. It simply becomes expected. Boundaries also transform the way you see yourself. Every time you calmly protect your values, you reinforce the belief that your needs matter. That internal change affects your posture, your voice, your decisions, and your confidence. You stop asking for permission to prioritize yourself. You stop feeling guilty for protecting your peace. Others notice these changes even if they can't identify exactly what's different. The goal isn't to become difficult or unavailable. It's to become intentional. Your kindness becomes more meaningful because it's offered by choice rather than obligation. Your time becomes more valuable because it isn't endlessly accessible. Your relationships become healthier because they are built on mutual respect instead of silent sacrifice, and people begin responding to you differently because you've quietly shown them that access to your energy is something that must be respected rather than automatically assumed. Most people believe influence comes from talking more, explaining more, or convincing others with better arguments. They think the person who speaks the most controls the conversation. But in reality, influence often belongs to the person who is least dependent on being heard. Silence has a unique psychological effect because it creates space. And in that space, people begin filling in the blanks with their own thoughts. The less you rush to explain yourself, the more others pay attention to what you do say. One of the biggest mistakes overly friendly people make is trying to remove every moment of discomfort. They feel responsible for keeping conversations alive, smoothing over awkward pauses, and making sure everyone feels comfortable. The instant silence appears, they rush to fill it with words. They tell another story, ask another question, offer another compliment, or explain something nobody asked about. They believe they're making the interaction better, but they're often reducing their own impact. Silence communicates confidence because it signals that you are comfortable without constant validation. A person who doesn't panic during quiet moments demonstrates emotional control. They don't feel pressure to entertain everyone. They don't fear that a few seconds of silence means the interaction has failed. They simply allow the moment to exist. Ironically, this calmness often makes other people lean into the conversation rather than pull away from it. There's another psychological reason silence is powerful. When you immediately answer every criticism, defend every decision, or justify every action, you give away control of the interaction. You're allowing someone else's reaction to dictate your behavior. The more you explain, the more it appears that you need their approval. Even if your explanation is perfectly logical, the emotional message underneath can be very different. It tells people that their opinion has enough power to make you abandon your composure. Think about how often people over-explain simple choices. They apologize for being unavailable. They provide long reasons for saying no. They defend harmless preferences as if they're standing trial. In reality, most of these explanations aren't for the listener. They're for the speaker's own comfort. They hope that if they explain enough, nobody will judge them. But excessive explanation rarely creates respect. It often creates the impression that you're uncertain about your own decisions. Confident people don't assume everyone must agree with them. They understand that disagreement is part of life. If someone misunderstands them, they don't immediately launch into a lengthy defense. If someone criticizes them unfairly, they evaluate whether a response is even necessary. Sometimes silence communicates more certainty than the perfect comeback ever could. This doesn't mean refusing to communicate or becoming emotionally distant. Silence is effective only when it's intentional, not when it's used as punishment or manipulation. The goal isn't to ignore people. The goal is to stop reacting impulsively. There's a significant difference between choosing your words carefully and speaking simply because you feel uncomfortable with quiet. Silence also changes how people perceive your emotional state. Someone who instantly reacts to every comment appears emotionally easy to influence. Their mood rises and falls depending on what others say. But someone who pauses before responding projects stability. That brief pause tells people you're thinking instead of reacting. It creates the impression that your emotions are under your control rather than under theirs. Another overlooked benefit of silence is that it encourages observation. While everyone else is busy talking, revealing their frustrations, insecurities, opinions, and intentions, you're gathering information. People often reveal far more than they intend because they assume silence means agreement or curiosity. The person speaking usually believes they're learning about you when, in reality, they're exposing themselves. Every conversation becomes an opportunity to understand motivations, habits, and patterns that would remain hidden if you constantly felt the need to speak. This ability to remain quiet also prevents unnecessary conflict. Many arguments continue only because both people feel compelled to have the final word. They mistake winning the conversation for winning the relationship. In truth, emotional discipline is often demonstrated by knowing which battles deserve your attention and which ones deserve your silence. Not every accusation requires an answer. Not every misunderstanding deserves correction. Not every opinion needs your approval or your opposition. The people with the greatest presence are rarely the loudest in the room. They speak with purpose instead of urgency. Their words carry weight because they are not buried beneath endless explanations, constant reassurance, or desperate attempts to be understood. They recognize that silence is not the absence of communication, but a form of communication itself, one that quietly signals confidence, patience, and emotional control while allowing others to reveal far more than they ever intended without you having to ask. One of the greatest mistakes people make in relationships is believing that access to them should be automatic. They assume that if they are always available, always responsive, and always willing to give their time, others will naturally appreciate them. It sounds reasonable, but human psychology rarely works that way. What comes easily is often taken for granted. What requires effort is usually valued more. This isn't about playing games or pretending to be unavailable. It's about understanding that your attention is one of the most valuable things you possess, and not everyone has earned unlimited access to it. Think about the relationships that have had the strongest impact on your life. Chances are, those people didn't instantly give you everything. Trust developed over time. Respect was built up through repeated actions. Their confidence wasn't based on convincing you to like them. Instead, they allowed the relationship to grow naturally, revealing more of themselves only as trust increased. That gradual process made the relationship feel meaningful because it was built rather than rushed. Many overly friendly people do the exact opposite. Within a very short time, they reveal everything about themselves. They immediately become emotionally available, share personal stories, solve problems that aren't theirs, and invest heavily in people they barely know. They assume openness will create connection. Sometimes it does, but more often it creates imbalance because the investment is one-sided. They give someone the privileges of a close relationship before that person has demonstrated they deserve them. Healthy relationships aren't built on instant access. They're built on consistency. Someone earns your trust by keeping their word. They earn your respect by treating you well over time. They earn your vulnerability by proving they can handle it responsibly. When you skip these steps, you remove the natural filters that protect your emotional energy. You begin investing in people based on hope instead of evidence. This principle applies everywhere, not just in friendships or dating, but in professional environments as well. Imagine someone who is constantly available for every request. They answer messages at all hours, accept every assignment, solve everyone's problems, and never decline extra work. At first, they may be praised for their dedication. But over time, something changes. Their availability becomes expected rather than appreciated. Instead of earning more respect, they often receive more demands. Now, compare that to someone who is dependable but selective. They fulfill their commitments, yet they also protect their priorities. They don't say yes automatically. They evaluate whether something deserves their time before accepting it. Because they don't hand out their attention freely, every commitment they make carries more weight. Their time feels valuable because it clearly has limits. There's another important psychological effect at work. People naturally become more invested in what they've worked to obtain. When someone earns your trust through patience, honesty, and consistent behavior, they value that trust more because they contributed to building it. If trust is given immediately without any effort, it often feels less significant. The same applies to respect, friendship, and emotional closeness. This doesn't mean forcing people through artificial tests or manipulating them into proving themselves. Real life provides enough opportunities for people to reveal who they are. Pay attention to whether they respect your time. Notice how they behave when they don't need anything from you. Observe how they speak about others, especially those who aren't present. Watch whether their actions consistently match their words. These small patterns tell you far more than grand promises ever could. Another trap overly friendly people fall into is confusing attention with connection. Someone texting you every day doesn't automatically value you. Someone complimenting you frequently isn't necessarily loyal. Someone wanting constant access to your time isn't always interested in your well-being. Genuine relationships are measured by consistency, respect, and mutual effort, not by frequency of contact alone. Learning to make people earn access also changes your own mindset. You stop asking, "How can I get this person to like me?" and start asking, "Has this person shown the qualities that deserve my trust?" That single shift completely transforms the dynamic. Instead of seeking approval, you begin evaluating character. Instead of chasing acceptance, you become intentional about where your energy goes. As this habit becomes part of your life, you'll notice something surprising. The people who genuinely care about you won't be offended by your standards. They'll respect them. They'll appreciate that your trust means something because it isn't given carelessly. Meanwhile, those who only wanted convenience or unlimited access will gradually distance themselves, revealing that they were attracted not to who you were, but to how easily they could benefit from your constant availability, leaving you surrounded by relationships built on mutual respect instead of unquestioned access. The greatest transformation you can make isn't learning clever conversation techniques or discovering ways to control other people. It is becoming someone who cannot be easily controlled by them. The moment your emotions stop depending on how others treat you, a quiet kind of strength begins to emerge. You no longer feel the need to chase approval, defend every decision, or keep everyone happy at your own expense. Instead, you move through life with a calm confidence that makes your actions intentional rather than reactive. Most people spend years trying to influence the behavior of everyone around them. They want others to respect them more, appreciate them more, include them more, or understand them better. But they overlook the one factor they can actually control: their own responses. Every time someone ignores them, criticizes them, or disappoints them, they immediately react. They send another message, explain themselves, apologize unnecessarily, or seek reassurance. In doing so, they unknowingly hand over control of their emotional state. People who are difficult to manipulate operate differently. They understand that every emotional reaction is information. When someone tries to provoke them and receives an instant response, they learn exactly which buttons to push next time. But when they encounter someone who remains composed, thoughtful, and emotionally steady, manipulation becomes much harder. Emotional control removes the reward that manipulators are looking for. This doesn't happen overnight. It begins with paying attention to your own patterns. Notice how often you change your behavior simply because you're worried about someone else's opinion. Notice how frequently you explain yourself when no explanation is necessary. Observe the moments when guilt, fear, or the desire to be liked influences your decisions. Awareness is the first step because you cannot change habits you refuse to acknowledge. One of the most powerful shifts you can make is learning to pause before reacting. When you receive criticism, don't rush to defend yourself. When someone disappoints you, don't immediately assume the worst. When someone disagrees with you, don't treat it as a personal attack. That brief pause gives your rational mind the opportunity to lead instead of allowing your emotions to take control. Often, you'll discover that your first impulse isn't your wisest response. Being selective doesn't mean becoming suspicious of everyone. It means recognizing that trust, respect, and emotional investment should grow through experience rather than assumptions. Some people deserve your loyalty because they've consistently earned it. Others only deserve politeness until they've demonstrated who they really are. This mindset protects your peace without making you cynical. You'll also discover that confidence has very little to do with appearing powerful. Real confidence is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't compete for attention. It doesn't need constant recognition. It simply remains stable regardless of external circumstances. When compliments come, you appreciate them without depending on them. When criticism comes, you evaluate it without allowing it to define you. Your identity becomes rooted in your values instead of public opinion. As you become calmer, you'll notice another change. You stop trying to rescue every relationship. Not everyone is meant to stay in your life forever. Some people appear only for a season. Others leave the moment you stop making everything easy for them. Instead of chasing those who walk away, you allow their actions to reveal their priorities. This saves enormous amounts of emotional energy because you no longer waste time convincing people to value what they were never willing to appreciate. The people who truly belong in your life will not require you to abandon your standards to keep them close. They will respect your boundaries, appreciate your honesty, and understand that healthy relationships involve mutual effort rather than one-sided sacrifice. Those relationships become stronger because they are built on authenticity instead of performance. When you stop being overly friendly, you don't become less kind. You become more intentional. Your generosity has purpose. Your attention has value. Your words carry greater weight because they are chosen carefully instead of offered automatically. You begin treating yourself with the same respect you've spent years giving everyone else, and that inner respect quietly changes the way the world responds to you. Remember, strength is not measured by how many people approve of you. It is measured by your ability to remain true to yourself when approval is uncertain. The calmest person in the room is often the strongest, not because they control everyone around them, but because they have learned to control themselves. Master that skill, and you'll discover that respect follows naturally, not because you demanded it, but because your actions consistently reflected self-respect, emotional discipline, and unwavering confidence. That is the kind of presence no one can